Right. Just so everybody is aware that the seminar is recorded, and for those of you who would like to go back and review this, we will shortly be sending it out on our website and on our Facebook posts and all this. So thank you everybody for joining our first webinar. I know that we actually should have some friends joining too on Facebook Live as our slots are filled up. So I hope you can hear me well and clear. If you have issue hearing us, please let us know. Before we start, I think just a few sort of admin house rules for those who join a webinar for the first time. We will keep the discussion today to about 1 to 1.5 hours. Throughout the discussions, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the speakers, feel free to type into the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your Zoom, and we will pick it up from there. Now, our first webinar for REFSA today, we aim to sort of explore and discuss about a very important topic that I think every country in the world is trying to grapple with, the impending economic recession or the depression, even at this rate that it is going, and more importantly, on its impact on businesses and on the livelihood of everyone. So the Prime Minister will later be giving a special announcement at 4 o'clock shortly. So we hope to have a bit more visibility on whether the movement control order will be further extended or a new arrangement will be put in place. So now I think this will have massive impact towards the economy, businesses, and for all of us, and make our discussion today even more important. To this extent, I think we hope to touch on a few areas. We should start by looking at the economic stimulus that Malaysia has announced thus far, the impact this has on the businesses, especially given that 98.5% of the businesses are SMEs, and they need to be provided a lifeline to weather through the economic storm. And last but not least, how do we ensure Malaysians, you and me, are protected from this very devastating financial consequences that comes with the economic repercussions of attempting to contain the virus. So in other words, how do we ensure people maintain their livelihood, have a job, able to work, able to continue to earn income? Now, I think it is important that we assess the current situation as it is, what can be done, what we should focus on, and also not forgetting post-COVID-19, when we come out of the movement control order at some point, how can we build back a better society? So today we have three very distinguished panelists to speak and share their views and insights in relation to these topics. I will introduce each of them right before they speak. But before we jump right into it, I thought it would be useful for us to share a couple of slides. I've prepared a couple of slides just to set the background and some facts and figures of the scenario that we are looking at. So let me just share the slides now. Just bear with me a second. Can everybody see me? If the panelists can see me, I hope the attendees as well can see the slides. Yeah. So, bear with me a sec. It looks like this is better. Sorry, hold on. Right, let me go back to sharing. Okay, so if we look at this particular slide that I sort of pulled it out from the Center for Economic Policy Research, we can see that generally what it's trying to say is that the correlation between the pandemic curve, which everybody is very familiar with here, whereby if you don't have any containment policies, the curve is very, very high up. If you have put in some measures to contain it, the curve starts to flatten. So there's a correlation between the pandemic curve and the economic recession curve from this chart, whereby making the medical crisis better may make the economic crisis worse in that sense, because economy will be very, very badly impacted when people are not moving around, when people are not spending. Globally, I think IMF has already said that the impact is as bad as the global financial crisis in 2009. So this is a very global phenomena where we can't sort of export our way out. Malaysia's GDP as provided by Bank Negara in the annual report recently, says that the growth forecast is going to be expected to be very, very low, between 0.5 to -2%. I think Kelvin has prepared some very, very nice information to talk a lot about jobs, and Dr. Michael has also will be able to give us very good insight on this. But I thought this chart that shows from America's latest unemployment numbers will it's interesting to sort of set the background of it. At the moment, 10 million people filed for unemployment benefit in the US, and just recently, I think it was yesterday, the New York Times said that another 6.6 million US worker filed for unemployment benefit. If you look at this line, it's quite scary because at the end of it, it's actually almost as straight as the axis here, whereby if you look at 2008 and 2009, there was just a small bump. So actually we are looking at very, very unprecedented time in terms of people losing their jobs and unemployment rates being very, very high. REFSA did a very small sort of fiscal stimulus tracker. We were tracking Malaysia's stimulus measures, especially focusing on fiscal stimulus. So if you look at the numbers, it has been increasing up until what has been announced on the 6th of April. 6.8% of the GDP, of Malaysia's GDP compared to the fiscal stimulus that we have now. The next slide is as it stands today. If you look at the entire nominal value, Malaysia is actually quite high, very high up. But if you adjust the package to remove any sort of liability that the government doesn't have to bear, Malaysia comes down to about 6.8%. But I think our speakers will have more information on that. And the last slide, which I thought was very interesting, researchers at the Flattening School of Government from the University of Oxford has designed a stringency approach whereby they look at the stimulus given by each country compared to the stringency also of the social distancing. So the stricter the social distancing measures, you would expect that the economy will suffer more. So Singapore, you can see that it's actually quite an outlier, which is very unique compared to all the other countries. Italy has very, very stringent social distancing measures. Its stimulus is not as high as, say, Malaysia or even the UK. So these are the couple of slides that I thought would be interesting to share with everybody before we go back to the main discussion for the session. So I thought we can start with Dato' Michael Kang, who needs no introduction. I think Dato' Michael is currently very much in the news, shedding light on the plights of the SME. He's currently the president of the SME Association in Malaysia. And so, as we all know, SMEs made up 98.5% of the businesses, and they bore the worst brunt in this economic downturn. So on over to you, Dr. Michael.
Thank you, Ihan. I think, Ihan, I think let me share the Malaysia's SME, what the challenge they're facing for the time being. I think it's very important, as when the government announced the similar package 2 at the time, we found that a lot of these similar package is not covered to assist the SME to save surviving, as when the government put out the MCO panic buttons, and stop the generate income for the SME. So SME can't do any business, we at the same time they're without any income, and everyone know that Malaysia, we about 1 million SME, 76.5% are micro. So micro consists of close to almost 700,000 SME in the country, micro. So this group of people are facing big challenge, as their cash on hand is very limited. The cash on the hand is almost they can survive for 2 weeks, or whatever the business they do, they are just enough to pay their expenditures. The balance is just enough for their food on the table for the family. I think this is the quite critical, when we found that this is no government are not focusing and help the SME when stop all the SME businesses. That's why when we discuss with the government, that we hope that the government can assist in SME to come out additional similar package. That's why they announced another 10 billion additional package, which is mostly taking care of low incomes SME, like those micro 700,000. They are one times subsidy for 300,000, plus the employments, employee to how to maintain, to keep the employee the job, so that giving additional this subsidy from 600 increased to 1,002, which is consists of small SME, which is 75 staff and below. I think this is very important to help the SME on the cash flow. The other than that, I think the most we are looking at also, because SME short of cash flow, so we want the government to release more easier for SME to apply loan from the government or from the bank. Those who are able to give like micro credit loan for the micro, other than subsidies 3,000, I think definitely not enough for them to cross this crisis or cross this MCO period. So we hope that the microcredit can help the SME to apply. Those who SME can use this as their expenditures or pay their fixed expenditure to cross this when MCO period. That's why the government announced the additional 5 billion, 500,000, originally 200,000 and 500,000 plus an additional 200,000 for Tukun to all in. I think should be 700 plus 900 million for the SME to apply, which is zero interest rate. I think this is something can help really micro to apply and survive. But now what the challenge is the SME facing is the applications, the approval rate, how fast can the bank approve all this micro credit loan, or either the SME loan like SRF, which government's additional increase to 5 billion from originally 2 billion increased to 5 billion, and agricultural loan SRF, which is from 3.75% interest rate reduced to 3.5. As I understand, this we are already 2 weeks or past the second or close to third weeks now. A lot of SMEs still struggle with their cash flow due to the bank process, the bank applications, the whole banking ecosystem is not there. So end up, as I understand, until yesterday, there's about 1,003, all in is on 1,300 company approved, but so far I have not heard anybody draw down the cash to ease their cash flow. I think this is the big challenge now for SME. If they can't draw down, if they can't get the cash from the bank, I think there's a big problem for them to continue to survive. As from our survey, this is 33.3% of SME, the cash can only last until March. Then the balance, the 37.8 can only last until April. So these two groups add together is about close to 70%. SME are facing financial difficulty. If the bank's loan process a loan still drag them a few more weeks, I think by April or May, I think no matter what government can give, or subsidy on the wages, I think it won't help SME to continue their business. They rather shut down and lay off the employee. I think government should focus now to make sure the loan process, give a time frame, and maybe a process of time loan should be a week, and then draw down another week, maximum 2 weeks. I think SME should be able to get the money to roll over this financial crisis. I think this is very important. We hope that the government can seriously look into it. So how to rescue the SME to keep the job. If not, I don't think the SME can able to sustain for March and April. After the April, I think a lot of company SME definitely will shut down. They rather stop to claim the 1,002 or even 800 or 600. The time for them to restructure internally and make themselves prepare themselves for the next wave. I think this is very important. This is what I'm looking at for last 2 weeks. The whole SME scenario. The other thing is, I think, to make SME to able to survive is we hope that the government can partially open up to allow the SME to operate partially, so that by sector, so the SME can generate some cash, some income from the businesses. If they can't get any help from the government, or delay a loan, or delay this subsidy drawdown, I think they can generate some cash to sustain their business. I think this is more important. So we are looking at how to make the SME company sustainable for the next 2-3 weeks, or even until May. I think this is a critical period now. If government did not do anything on it, even a wage subsidy, I think wouldn't help. The SME might go bust and stop the business, stop the operation, and more people lost the job. I think this is this few area I'm focusing on now. I think this is quite critical now. We hope that you can see from other speaker. Then later on, pass down mic back to Ihan, and we can discuss later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Michael. Just a quick question. You mentioned about perhaps opening up certain industries or certain sectors that could help. How do you see? There were some suggestions whereby you could go, say, by zones, areas that are in the red zone, which apparently today, I think Kuantan is also part of the red zone now. If I'm not mistaken, there's about 24 areas that are red zones. Do you think going by zones may help, or sorry, you need to unmute yourself.
I think definitely will help. That is why we also propose that go by zone. Those green zone areas able to operate, but also need to follow the SOP, KKM SOP to monitor on it. If not, for those you are green zone, if somebody from the red zone come over, to do business, I think also will affected. I think this area we need to. The SOP is very important when we start operate on partially.
So we're talking about implementation and ensuring that the process are clear, the information is out there, and clearly the ministries have to have the capacity and the resources to handle it. Yeah. Thank you very much for your insights on this, Dr. Michael. I think now we can move on to Kelvin. Kelvin is an analyst in the Economics, Trade and Regional Integration Division in Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS. Kelvin has been writing a lot, and your recent work has focused on the policy design of cash transfer programs, including Malaysia's BSH, BR1M program. I think just 6 days ago, Kelvin, you wrote an article about the faces of poverty in Malaysia amid the virus outbreak, the invisible people that a lot of us don't see and don't experience. So on to you, Kelvin. Perhaps you can shed some light on this issue.
Thank you. Hope you guys can hear me. A pleasure to be here. So I think I'll turn off my video because my internet actually not very stable. So once I share the screen, okay, and I'll stop my video. Okay. So, yeah, thank you. So today I have three main areas to cover. So the first one, I want to talk a little bit about impacts and then what the latest data can tell us. So a lot of data came out yesterday in terms of there's a DOSM survey that came out yesterday, and there's a business tendency survey yesterday. So I want to talk a little bit about the impacts and what that can tell us about where we're heading. And secondly, I want to briefly explain some of my thinking on economic policy responses, specifically on the COVID crisis, because it's different from normal crises. And then third, I want to cover some of the PRIHATIN stimulus packages and then how we can strengthen, some of the shortfalls to sort of increase, to achieve greater impacts. So in the interest of time today, I won't cover things like BSH, PTN, household cash transfers. If you want, you can read some on that on isis.org.my, but I won't be covering that today. So firstly, impacts, right? So what are the impacts of the COVID crisis and what are the channels of transmission of these impacts? So firstly, of course, we have external, right? And we know that the key external shock, of course, is trade linkages, because we know that Malaysia is both, one of the most trade-dependent countries and also one of the most deeply integrated countries in the region, if you're talking about participation in global value chains. So what that means is that we are both highly dependent on trade, and the type of trade that we engage in are the exact kind that's very easily disrupted, right? Due to how complex international linkages of global value chains are, which means one disruption on one node can have cascading effects. The other external risk, of course, financial uncertainty. In recent weeks, we've seen huge outflows from emerging markets like Malaysia. This has negative effects on EM equities, EM currencies, and commodity prices is another big thing. But today, this panel specifically is focusing on business, SMEs, and workers. So for them, the key risk factor is actually domestic, okay? So specifically, the negative effects of the Movement Control Order, or MCO. So like was mentioned in the intro slide, the MCO that we use to reduce the spread of the virus, absolutely essential, right? We definitely need this. But we have to know that this also completely destroys the Malaysian economy, right? Because it stops people from working, it stops firms from producing, lowers ability of people to consume and for firms to invest. So it absolutely destroys the Malaysian economy. So those are the channels of transmission. What does the data tell us? Okay. So what can the latest data tell us? Well, we know that economic data is often released with a lag, but there are some data points trickling in, slowly. It can give us an idea of where we're heading and what sort of impacts that businesses and workers are facing. So spoiler alert, the latest data indicate that conditions in Malaysia are pretty bad, okay? So the chart on the left shows the business tendency survey data released by the OSM just yesterday. And this shows expectations of revenue for businesses by sector, just 4 broad sectors. So anything below that gray horizontal axis means that revenues are expected to be negative, okay? And we can see across the board, across all sectors, that this is going to be anticipating a negative revenue for the first quarter of 2020. And some subsectors like wholesale and retail trade anticipate over a 20% fall in revenue. That's really massive. Because unlike manufacturing firms who can have a backlog of orders until they resume production, we know that services businesses are likely to face permanent revenue losses, right? Because sales missed over the MCO period will not be replaced when it ends, right? Unlike manufacturing. So for example, if I buy coffee, every morning before going to work and I completely stop during the MCO, after the MCO ends, I won't, suddenly go and buy 20 coffees to make up for all the coffees that I didn't buy, right? So these sales, we have to remember they're permanently gone, okay? And this is bad, right? Because economic census data, you see on the right-hand chart, suggests that 88% of all businesses in Malaysia are related to the services sector. And more than half of that 88% is in the wholesale and retail trade subsector, followed by food and beverage, and then the transport and accommodation subsectors, all of which are heavily affected by MCO measures, right? So this tells us something a little bit about the magnitude of the impact. These 4 heavily affected sectors, retail, trade, F&B, transport, accommodation, these 4 subsectors alone comprise nearly 640,000 businesses, according to survey data. And next, this is the latest survey data on firms from DOSM Special Survey on COVID-19. This came out just yesterday afternoon. This survey covers firms and workers in the last 2 weeks of March, so we can get a sense of how the MCO measures and the pandemic are affecting their livelihoods, okay? And the data is very, very scary, okay? The first graph on the left shows that a majority of all businesses in all sectors have reported a decline in earnings in just the last 2 weeks. And we can see exactly which sectors have been, the hardest hit. And overall, as we expected, F&B, agriculture-related subsectors, retail, trade, transport, and accommodation have been severely affected. About 90%, if you see the chart on the left, about 90% of F&B businesses and about 3/4 of businesses in accommodation, fisheries, and forestry has reported declines in income over the last 2 weeks of March. And this tells us the scale, but it doesn't tell us how deep these income drops are, which are is likely to be very, very large. And the second graph on the right focuses on the workers in this sector. So the one on the left is businesses, the one on the right is workers, right? And we can see that the effects on workers are even more alarming, okay? Over a third, 35% of workers in F&B and fisheries and the arts subsectors, these people have already lost their jobs, right? They have already lost jobs. That's a dark blue line. And if we count other bad labor market outcomes, right, including workers who were forced to take unpaid leave or have had their pay cut or the hours reduced, this chart on the right shows that over 77% of workers in F&B have already experienced some type of negative labor market outcome in just the last 2 weeks, right? I'll move on. So we know that we need an economic response that is fast and that is big. Just to give a recap, many people are not clear what the goals of economic response to this COVID crisis should actually be, because unlike past crises, like I mentioned earlier, we can't just repair balance sheets and stimulate demand, because this is a different sort of crisis. So as such, in my view, and in my previous proposal on isis.org.my, I outlined 3 goals for economic policy during this COVID crisis. First goal, protect the cash flows of households and businesses. Second goal, and this is key, okay, protect employer-worker relationships and retain jobs. And the third is to stimulate the economy after the MCO period to kickstart economic recovery. Next. So in that report, I proposed a 2-stage economic policy response. The first stage to be implemented during the MCO period, again, focusing on these 2 goals, safeguarding livelihoods and safeguarding jobs. And at this stage, we are not focused on stimulating the economy, okay? Stage 2, this is when traditional stimulus measures come in, right? Second stage, for the post-MCO recovery period, focusing on stimulating demand and investing in improving productivity and resilience for future growth. So how does the PRIHATIN stimulus package stack up, right? Overall, it has many of the measures that I initially proposed in my report, but of course there are shortfalls in the scale and some issues with program design, which I will cover in just a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time here because you just need to note the business SME measures on the number 2, because that's what we're focusing on in this webinar today, and we'll get into that a bit. The second thing to note is the chart on the right, which shows a breakdown of the total package. So all 3 packages from February to April, the total package size 260 billion, of which about 35 billion is actually government spending. And when you put it in a column like that, you can really see how what the scale is for each measure. And you can see the scale of the SME support measures and the cash transfers to households is really quite minuscule, quite small compared to the loan moratoriums, the SME loan guarantees and EPF measures, whose costs are borne by statutory bodies, by the way, not by the federal government. So that's that. Okay, so what else do we need from PRIHATIN, right? What else do we need? How can we mend some of these shortfalls to increase the effectiveness of PRIHATIN, to increase the impacts? So number 1, oh, the chart here is it? Okay, sorry. Number 1, job retention, right? More focus on job retention. We already saw earlier that the scale of job losses in just the last 2 weeks of March alone is already very severe. And so in some ways, this may already be too late, but nonetheless, there's a sense that, PRIHATIN needs to focus more on employment retention and preserving employer-worker relationships. As I said earlier, the post-MCO economic recovery, how fast we can recover will greatly depend on how much we can preserve these jobs and these relationships right now, right? So there are 2 existing job retention programs in PRIHATIN. One of them is the Employment Retention Program, or ERP, and the second one is the Wage Subsidy Program, or WSP. Just quickly, the ERP offers about 600 per month for workers put on unpaid leave. The WSP, the Wage Subsidy Program, is an extension of the ERP, which offers about 600 to 1,200 per worker per month for 3 months, depending on firm size. In that smaller firms get more, larger firms get less. But only to firms who can prove they have experienced a 50% fall in revenues in January, and only for businesses registered under the EIS, and only for workers who earn below 4,000 ringgit per month. Okay, so we can immediately see some shortfalls here, right? Firstly, by imposing strict conditions like cutting off workers earning above 4K completely, or it's only for registered firms, and these firms need to prove that they have received a 50% fall in earnings. This undermines employment retention goals, okay? And similarly, the current wage subsidy program targeting by company size. So just to recap, large firms get 600 per worker, smaller firms get 1,200 per worker. So this targeting by company size is, I think, unusual, maybe administratively complex. You know, in a crisis, we want to avoid, in a crisis like this, we want to really avoid over-targeting. We want to, so as to minimize exclusion errors, right? We want programs to be broad and we want them to be fast. So I think, as such, in my opinion, in my view, I think there's a need to, like other programs in other parts of the world, instead set a flat replacement rate. Let's say replace 70% of worker monthly incomes, subject to a maximum benefit amount. In my view, I think this would be more impactful in retaining jobs. And the other problem is coverage, right? So this is not really related to employment retention. It's more of a unemployment benefit sort of thing. But the other problem is coverage. We need to extend full benefits to the informal, self-employed or casual workers under the EIS benefits program. Okay. Next thing. For SMEs, for businesses, we need more grants versus loans, right? So for businesses, in my perspective, measures in PRIHATIN generally in the right direction, in that policies have both really support liquidity at the same time reduce costs for SMEs. You know, so businesses can keep the lights on and not fire too many workers. But one shortfall, in my view, is just that overall, we need more outright grants versus merely, you know, working capital loans. So currently, there's only one grant policy for businesses. It's the PRIHATIN special grant, and it's only for micro SMEs with 5 workers or less. And like Dato' Michael said, it's only a one-off 3,000 ringgit grant just for micro SMEs, right? So the amount is low and the coverage is very, very narrow. You know, like I mentioned earlier, many businesses, especially SMEs, are in huge amounts of distress, and many in the service sector face permanent losses of revenue, okay? And many of these SMEs will not be able to pay off their debts due to this, because their revenue streams will become so uncertain, especially if the MCO is extended, and we'll find out if that's the case in half an hour. But what this means is that while working capital loans can be a lifeline, though they must be very cheap, okay? They can be a lifeline, but loans are debt, right? And this risks merely burdening already distressed firms even more, because the expense of paying back that loan, you know, even over like a long period of time, would absolutely destroy their profits, you know, kill their profits going down the line. And what more with higher interest loans like the special relief facility by Untitled, which is currently at 3+%, which is pretty high. So instead, so instead we need more grants, aka rapid cash injections, okay, to SMEs. There's a second point here, is that there is the opportunity to link provision of liquidity support, provision of these grants back to our employment retention goal, right? So besides providing liquidity, we also need to incentivize worker retention. We can do that by making some portion of the grant conditional on some target of worker retention. So overall, larger outright grants to more businesses. And then we need to make some portion of these grants conditional on that business meeting some worker retention target. For example, if your SME, let's say if your SME retains 80% of your workers, we will give you a larger grant or more concessionary grant, right? Just one more point on the post-MCO economy. The other thing is we need more focus on what happens after the MCO, how to kickstart the economic recovery and make up for lost ground during MCO, right? So post MCO, this is getting to more traditional stimulus territory. Now we can really stimulate the economy, right? The first thing that we propose is to expand infrastructure spending. So the current amount of 4 billion infrastructure spending is very minimal because that is the only post-MCO stimulus. 4 billion is not even 3% of GDP, by the way. So we need a larger expansion of government spending, especially in infrastructure in the post-MCO period, focusing on underdeveloped regions in the country, right? Second thing, for post-MCO, we need post-MCO income transfers. So currently, the cash transfer programs are targeted towards income support, and they are fine for MCO period. But after the MCO, we need another different, more broadly targeted income transfer to provide immediate cash injections to Malaysian households, right? And this can be structured as a immediate tax rebate or through the BTM mechanism. But this will get money out into the real economy quickly, really quickly, even quicker than traditional stimulus measures like corporate tax cuts, right? And third thing, crisis spending is a really good time to start investing in strengthening social safety nets and strengthening our automatic stabilizers. So strengthening social safety nets / automatic stabilizers like EIS unemployment insurance, like DSH cash transfers. This will increase Malaysia's resilience to economic shocks in the future, okay? So what is an automatic stabilizer? Just to explain really quickly. I think this is my last slide. Yep. So what is automatic stabilizer? So programs like the EIS unemployment insurance and the DSH cash transfers, they are automatic stabilizers because they automatically ramp up government spending when economic conditions worsen, right? Often very quickly, even before policymakers realize there's a problem. So I think that focusing more on the post-MCO measures overall will help us rebound quicker compared to if we just rely on that 4 billion infrastructure spending. And that's it for me, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. Before we move on, I have a quick question, which I thought that you pointed out very importantly on the leakages of certain groups of the workers that are not being considered as in this whole PRIHATIN packages, which are the own account and the self-employed workers. So given that Malaysia, we don't have comprehensive data on self-employed people, what would be the best policy tool in your view that we can assist this group of people, and what sort of packages or help would be most needed in let's say in the next 6 to 12 months?
I think there are two separate groups. One of them, they are self-employed, but they are Malaysian citizens and they are eligible to receive BPN transfers, the Bantuan PRIHATIN national transfers and the Bantuan Sara Hidup transfers. So they can receive some sort of assistance through that. And in my proposal, I proposed also extending the EIS unemployment benefit, specifically the job search allowance, to self-employed workers as well to sort of cover that hole. But then there's the other group that are completely excluded from any of these programs, right? And these are people who are undocumented. They can be refugees, they can be indigenous folks who are undocumented. And these people are not eligible to receive any sort of assistance from any government agency, and these are the people who really fall through the cracks. And I think currently there isn't a really good mechanism to assist them besides relying on NGOs, and I think that's where we need to focus, some of our efforts on.
Kevin, then I think the other group I think we have not covered is those freelancer professional. They are not registered. They are work all job done per job, pay per job. All those group of people, they are not registered. That means they cannot claim 3,000. They got none of them because they got no staff. Even they got staff also, one or two not paying any. So I think this group also quite a large numbers of that in Malaysia.
Yep.
Right. We'll get back to this topic in a bit more detail later in the Q&A sessions. I understand that our Facebook Live is now working, so welcome to our friends who are joining on Facebook Live about 15 minutes ago. If you have any questions as well, you could put it in the comment section, and our team will try to pick it up. And the seminar is also recorded, so if you missed out the first 10-15 minutes, you can view it later on our website. So our third speaker I would like to introduce is Ms. Smita Koryakose to share her views and perhaps analysis as well, both from a national context and from a regional sort of perspective. Smita is a senior economist in the finance, competitiveness and innovation global practice in the World Bank. She has led policy dialogues on entrepreneurship in China, in Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and also focused on fiscal and macro policies in previous UN and World Bank projects. So on to you, Smita.
Thanks, Ewan. I'm going to share my presentation so you can see it. Okay, so the presentation today, I'm going to be focusing on SMEs because that's the audio or the focus today. And to begin with, I'm going to reiterate a lot of things actually that the previous panelists and you yourself have actually indicated. Given that this is a global pandemic, this is no longer contained in one particular country, the magnitude of the crisis is actually much more, and it's unprecedented just because of these reverberating effects, as we call them. As you had nicely pointed out in your first slide, we are talking about a situation where in addition to the health crisis, we have an economic crisis. And at some level, there is some kind of a trade-off, and the trade-off is very real. What we've seen is globally, there's been large capital outflows. The FDI is expected to drop as much as 40% in 2020. And there will be sharp drops in manufacturing and services activities. Now, if you look at the second figure in this slide, you'll actually see this is that for China. And you'll see basically all the sectors have shown a steep decline, barring e-commerce, which is what I will get back to later on in terms of what are the policies, what should be the kind of the essence of government stimulus packages, as well as the support that they give, especially SMEs in the short term as well as in the medium to long term. And now, as Kelvin pointed out, there are various transmission mechanisms in play here. On the supply side, you have labor, who either you lose some of the labor because by the sickness or lockdowns or MCOs, like in the case of Malaysia. On the demand side, there's a decrease in spending, both foreign as well as domestic. And there are, of course, financial channels through which, because both the banking sector and the capital markets are not able to provide the kind of liquidity that SMEs especially require. And very significantly, as Dato Kang pointed out, global value chains and the fact that we are very integrated into global value chains, especially in a country like Malaysia, which is deeply integrated. Supply chain disruptions have a huge effect on the supply as well as demand side. And finally, there's a decline in confidence because there is such there is so much uncertainty around this pandemic. Nobody knows how long it will last. So there is obviously decline in investor confidence and also a decline in investments for innovation and entrepreneurship for firms. Now, looking at Malaysia, the World Bank's recent estimates at the baseline suggest that 2020, there will be a contraction of the growth rate. So we are looking at from the baseline to the low case scenario from minus 0.1 to minus 4.6%, which is significantly a higher impact than most other East Asian countries, as you will see here. On the right-hand side, I have two graphs which actually look at, we've analyzed Google Big Data to look at what has been the effect in tourism transport as looking at the airport traffic in KLIA, as well as the retail sector, you see that there's been a sharp decline, an 81% decline, which is huge. Of course, to do a lot with, it has to do a lot with the MCO. Now, in this context, I mean, we have basically, literature right now is looking at phase 1, which is the outbreak, which is the situation we are in right now, the short term, which can last up to 6 months, where basically we're looking at containing the health crisis as well as the economic crisis. And phase 2, which we call post-COVID, the recovery, wherein lockdown is removed and economic conditions gradually return to pre-crisis level. However, there will still be a lot required to actually make sure, especially in the case of SMEs, they're able to remain in business and maintain market shares, and in some cases actually look for new markets because their previous markets may have disappeared. So I'm not going to go through the entire table, but this table basically just shows you what are the various transmission mechanisms, the shocks in the short term, and what does it mean for firms. Like I had mentioned, in the demand side, it's liquidity problems for firms. There's also the supply side in terms of worker layoffs and reduced outputs, and the uncertainty shocks, which will implies investments are postponed due to uncertainty. And in some cases, it's actually, it becomes more pronounced. Now, in the post-COVID crisis, the recovery would mean that while, first of all, we must acknowledge the fact that recovery will not be uniform. Recovery will not be uniform across sizes, sectors, and even regions. So when the government is looking at policies, it needs to be cognizant of that. There may be some sectors which will take a lot longer to recover, for example, tourism and transport. And then there are supply shocks, which will take much longer to actually come back. There have been huge supply chain disruptions, and this is not going to be easy to resuscitate. So there has to be a lot of emphasis given to actually regain those supply chains, helping SMEs especially to get access to new export markets, even domestic markets. And here I would say there needs to be an emphasis on making sure SMEs actually have digital presence. In China, we saw that a lot of the research is showing that it is actually those SMEs that were digitally present that were able to weather the crisis a lot better. In fact, a lot of their social distancing measures that they had in place in 2003 in SARS actually helped them in this crisis. They were a lot more digitally present. And previous research has shown that while Malaysia is digitally, actually, it is pretty inclusive in terms of everybody has access, SMEs are actually quite, they lag behind when using digital interface or digital platforms for actual business transactions and e-commerce. So this is something certainly that needs to be addressed in the short as well as in the long term. And the uncertainty shocks in terms of, we're also looking at maybe in some cases, FDI firms that have linkages to SMEs. So if you're going to give them access, support, it needs to be contingent on them not laying off workers, ensuring that their investments are preserved. And we are well aware at this stage, Malaysia is not going to be able to attract new investment, but the emphasis needs to be to retain the existing investment. So the support to the real sector has been quite significant in all countries. There have been large fiscal stimulus packages announced all over globally, with both fiscal and non-fiscal measures to strengthen not only the health sector but also protect households as well as firms. Now, in the case of Malaysia, there have been three packages, all totaling to 260 billion ringgit. But while it's large compared to other economies, it's 17%, one must realize, as Calvin also pointed out in his presentation, a large part of the package actually relies on non-fiscal measures. So the net fiscal impulse is actually only 2.3%, which is rather modest. So, but this also reflects the comparatively weak fiscal position that Malaysia is starting from. And this is also exacerbated by the fact that there are weakening revenues in terms of oil prices declining. And so in this first phase, when we're talking about during the storm, as we call it, the emphasis, as has been in the case of Malaysia, is to minimize disruption to firms so that they are able to keep lights on. For example, so the idea is to protect businesses so that workers are protected and hence households and livelihoods are protected. But specific attention has to be given to MSMEs, and this has again been alluded to during Calvin's presentation. So this increasingly has been done through wage support, direct wage support. Now, in the global financial crisis in 2008-9, one of the schemes that actually got a lot of visibility was the German Kurzarbeit. So this was called the short-term wage subsidy, and this was essential in stabilizing the labor market. And so this has actually been tried. A lot of countries have tried to model this, and there have been countries that have given as much as 75 to 90% of the entire wage bill. But having said that, it depends largely on the fiscal situation that a country is starting with. So in addition to that, of course, there are transfers to cover rental, utilities, etc. But what other things the government could do is to expedite payments to SMEs, or in the case of Malaysia, for suppliers from GLCs to get their payments promptly. And another thing to look at is the insolvency framework. I mean, to be able to restructure the insolvency framework so that to facilitate, especially SMEs who may be on the verge of bankruptcy. And of course, to maintain the access to finance, and easing and postponing tax obligations, and keeping trade open. This is very important because you want to reduce the cost of intermediate inputs as well as finished products, and you do not want to have, so it is very important to actually make sure that trade is open. And then finally, you may want to have systematically important firms, like I mentioned, foreign firms that have deep linkages to SMEs in certain sectors. Now, other things to highlight is we need to leverage fintech to improve access to finance for MSMEs, which again comes back to the fact that we need to use digital platforms. You need to also basically empower SMEs with clear and up-to-date information. This cannot be emphasized enough because the lack of information actually makes it worse for SMEs. And I'm going to focus on some of these in the post-COVID situation. Now we are looking at a situation in a few minutes. We don't know whether the MCO is going to be extended or not, irrespective. And this is something even you alluded to in one of your remarks. How should we do this, especially for firms? It is very important in order not to have a second or third wave of this epidemic, that the government produces an environment wherein SMEs can actually resume operations safely and rapidly. Now, what does that mean in terms of, and it safely would mean in a phased approach, as Dato Kang pointed out. It needs to be done in such a way that there is enough of a phased approach such that you're able to demarcate those that are in the red zone, for example, with vis-a-vis others. And this has to be done by certain mechanisms in place. There needs to be continued increase in testing to make sure that you're able to keep track of those that are immune because they've already either had the virus, and those who are tested, then they're able to be adequately quarantined so that and then most importantly, you're able to give firms like support such that they're able to ensure that they're able to clean their premises if there is a case of COVID, and this has been done. For example, I think countries have a COVID cleaning fund that SMEs can tap into. Another thing, to be able to have SMEs access business insurance. because you don't want the onus of being able to resume business in a safe environment to fall completely on SMEs. So this is again something that there needs to be specific attention given to. And when you talk about, there needs to be a focus on having this increasing business resilience and competitiveness of the private sector. So use the crisis as an opportunity to actually set the foundation of long-term business resilience. Now, in the short term as well as the long term, another thing that the governments could actually do is to ease SME participation in public procurement. By doing that, you're also boosting demand for these SMEs, which would have actually lost a lot of their markets. Now, so in terms of other incentives policy actions that we're talking about, we're also talking about boosting demand and reactivating supply chains. Again, something that I've alluded to in terms of supporting firms to find new suppliers in new markets, as well as giving them easing their participation in public procurement, revamping SME support programs. Now, Malaysia has a lot of SME support programs. So the idea needs to be to use the existing mechanisms in place, but to make sure that you're tailoring it to serve the needs of the SMEs. Another thing that the crisis has showed us today is that firms need to be agile. Firms need to be resilient. So in order to do that, you need to equip the firms, foster greater innovation, digitization, so that they are digitally present, but they also need to invest in worker training, reskilling. Now, if working online is going to be the new normal, you will need to invest a lot in actually also reskilling your workers. And finally, and definitely not the least, you need to make sure that broader investment climate reforms are continued, whether it is reforming the investment incentives, wherein you make sure that they are digitized, they are transparent, they are more accessible, they're not just about sectors, but it's more activity-based, wherein you are ensuring that more higher value-added investments are coming into Malaysia. You ensure quality infrastructure and backbone services. If you have to have more online presence, you need to have the digital ICT backbone infrastructure. And continue service liberalization in certain services, and pursue deep trade integrations, wherein you basically, which ensures further structural reforms. Now, having said this, I think the key principles to be kept in mind would be that the government speed is of the essence, that you need to act fast, because as Dato' pointed out, nearly 33% and 37%. So you're looking at a large percentage of SMEs that are actually going to be without cash by April. So you need to act fast, and then you need to be agile and constantly getting real-time feedback from the private sector to actually continuously recalibrate these programs. And that is where SME Association and the private sector should play a key role in coordinating and giving this feedback back to the government, so that in real time, there can be course correction. And all policies, they need to be accessible, as Calvin pointed out. They need to be easy to access as well as to administer. You do not want a situation where you have all these policies, but they're just so difficult for people to access that you're not able to, they're not able to bear fruit. And they need to be time bound. There needs to be clear timelines and an exit strategy, because by the end, you don't want, this is taking a huge toll fiscally, but it needs, and it is required right now, but there needs to be a medium to long-term plan to make sure that there is an exit strategy for these, but at the same time, the existing programs keep in mind some of the lessons that we've learned from this crisis, to make sure that those particular key salient features exist in the SME programs going forward. And of course, there needs to be a right balance between being ambitious in the support and staying within fiscal space. So I'll stop here and continue discussion on questions.
Thank you very much, Smita. Before we go into the Q&A section, I have a very quick question for you. So in terms of financing the stimulus, what specific constraints do you see developing countries face? Will they generally be able to afford the programs that their economies may require? And if not, what should be done about it?
So definitely, I mean, I think the fiscal space is a major constraint, right? You may need to have a large stimulus, but if you don't have the fiscal space, that is a real constraint. Now, even with this package, our early estimates show that you're looking at a fiscal deficit of close to 7% for Malaysia. So I think the idea here is, are there ways to actually increase revenue generation for Malaysia? So that you're able to actually put in something back into the economy so that the whole is not as large. So that's something to consider, to look at other ways of revenue generation in this very tough time.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I think we have about half an hour left that I would like to sort of bring all the speakers out to talk about some of the Q&A questions that we've been receiving for since the session started. Perhaps we can start with having a bit more sort of insight into the actual decision-making process that the SMEs are actually making. So for Dr. Michael, some questions that I have, and in fact, Kelvin and Smita has pointed it out. Kelvin, I picked it up in terms of the wage support is very important for them to retain their staff. Do you think that the SMEs and the micro SMEs, are they actually coping with this well through this stimulus measure? And Smita mentioned about digital presence. For example, in China, SARS sort of gave them a way to kickstart that, so they have been managing a bit better. How are our SMEs coping with it now? Are they actually considering laying off their workers? But if they are, do they see any long-term effect on their businesses? For example, they won't be able to hire talented people in the future.
I think what I understand, the micro is when you're asked them to embark into the digitals, I think it's a big challenge currently for them because they got total no knowledge about that, how to go about this. Is why we are working very closely now with the MDEC so that MDEC can provide a good platform, to bring all this micro in, how to generate, help them in their businesses. And this is very important. If you talk about, I think for micro, if they are lay off any staff, I think definitely for them it's difficult to find someone that can be trusted, because most of the micro, I think their staff, maybe because micro consists of five staff and below. I think those who most probably are really working with them for last 5 years, 10 years. I think this is the something like a family, So it's for them to lay off this staff is a very critical decision. Unless it's really no choice, they have to. I think we definitely need more assistance, like what Kevin said, from the government, immediate action, whatever. This way we must act fast to help the SME, especially micro and small. And this is group. Not even that, I think we're also looking at the medium-sized and large SME also facing a huge problem. Like we have the members, they are running retail, they got the 80 over outlet, they every money rental, they had to spend a few million, plus the employee also, they had to pay the staff salary also a few million. So every month they had to come up 6 to 7 million only for rentals and the salary. I think they totally shut down MCO. I think the whole month they really lost 6 to 7 million. This is only on the rental part. How about the others? I think they are also facing huge losses. Now, most of them are prepared to lay off 50% of their staff first. Since a retail outlet, they might close down some outlet which is not able to reduce the rentals or support their businesses.
Yep, and I think we can already start seeing this from the numbers that Kelvin was presenting earlier. Yeah. Perhaps, Kelvin, we can get some aspects from yourself. I think there are a couple of Q&A questions that are directed to you. Perhaps we can start with the one where what can the state government do to make up the shortfalls in the federal level for the stimulus package?
Yeah, state governments is a very, very tough question because state governments are constrained by the amount of money they have, and of course the revenue they have is only from quick rent and some other limited revenue measures. So, which of course is minimal, right? So some richer states in Sunwell, I think to my knowledge, have already rolled out some state level initiatives. But I think that the main thing is that states can sort of help federal government in identifying vulnerable groups that are left out of the federal level targeting. But I'm afraid that to my knowledge, there's not much they can do besides that. Maybe someone else would have any answers. Should I just go up all the questions? Or?
Yeah, sure, we could do that.
Okay, I'm looking at the Q&A thing now, and I'll just briefly go through.
Yeah, but perhaps you may want to repeat the question as well in case we have our Facebook friends also. Yeah.
Okay. So Edwin, hi Edwin. You asked about if the government subsidizes 75% of wages for all workers, how can the government afford it? Basically, this is a question on affordability and on fiscal measures, right? So and that just really quickly, I think that we still have fiscal space. I think the primary obstacle is not fiscal space, it's actually political.
Sorry, Kelvin,
in that they are statutory debt limit. So the current, yep.
Your line is not too well, so maybe you want to start again. I'll just say the question again. I think the question is about if the government decide to subsidize 75% of wages of all the workers, can the government afford it? And if not, what are some of the ways that our government can raise enough funds? Sorry, so it was a bit fuzzy earlier. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep. Now it's better.
Okay. So like I said, I tend to think we still have fiscal space. And I also think that the primary obstacle is not actually fiscal space. It is actually a political will. And by that, I mean there is a limit, statutory limits on the amount of debt to GDP that we can take, which is 65%. And there's also fiscal rules that do not allow using debt to fund operating expenditures. Because these fiscal responses will definitely conventionally cause a deficit in operating budget, but obviously because there's a rule on not having to fund operating expenditures with debt, this means that financing will have to be off balance sheet. Off balance sheet is the name of the game. But besides that, we also need to understand that subsidizing wages now means that less expenditure later on.
Hello, Kelvin. I think your line is a bit. Hello, Kelvin.
So in terms of preventing a larger crisis from unfolding, in terms of an unemployment spiral, and this also supports businesses indirectly, and we.
Hello, Kelvin.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. It sort of got cut off a little bit there. Maybe what would help? What would help is if you can type down the answer and I can sort of mention it to everybody. That would help.
Well, I can just reply individually by typing actually. So maybe you can.
Sure, but I think for the rest of the crowd, we can also mention it as well. I was also keeping a bit of a tab on the latest news. That is the special announcement going on by the Prime Minister, and I think there's another extension of 2 more weeks. So we should all be prepared and start thinking about sort of the next steps and the ways to deal with it. Certainly, it's going to be the same scenario of restriction of movement going forward. Perhaps while Kelvin, you type the question, maybe we can go on to a question for Smita by an anonymous attendee. Smita, could you elaborate further on which sectors will take longer to recover post-COVID and why?
Yes, so basically there's sectors we're talking about are travel and tourism, because it's going to take a little longer for people to, have, you're looking at a phased approach, in the sense people come back to work, and, it's going to take a longer time for them to start going on vacation and, traveling. So I think globally it has been recognized that travel and tourism is possibly going to be one sector that has been hit, and it's going to take a little longer to recover, just because of the nature of the sector. We're not talking about, people coming out of an MCO are not going to start planning a holiday. So that's why I think specific packages have been set aside for the tourism sector in many countries, including Malaysia.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that even now it's very clear that the F&B and the services sector are very much affected. But in fact, we can't really say we can't really pinpoint any specific one that is not affected. I think all across the line, everybody is suffering to a large extent. Dato' Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
I think nothing much. I think this Smita already, mentioned that. And I think this is important. I think I got nothing to add on that.
Okay, yeah. Sure. We have a question here that I thought it would be interesting to mention for everyone. What's your view on development projects rolled out by the government in the stimulus package? Are they enough in stimulating activities for businesses, particularly the SMEs?
Okay, I think similar package is not means what we were looking at, similar how to stimulate the economy, how to assist the SME overcome the cash flow. I think this is called similar income. It's more important. That's why when we propose this two stage, one is assistance from the government when totally locked down. Then after that, how government can help the SME, the similar the economy, like open up some partially operation or some tax incentive or attractive to stimulate attract the businesses, or even we also propose that like SST will be able to remove SST for 3 months so that it will stimulate the economy, so that people will feel that, oh, there's a tax free, then they will spend. This is something like spend. That's why government is able to come up much more bold and aggressive package, to boost the economy.
Would any of the panelists like to add to that? Okay, so we'll just move on. I found an interesting one here as well. I think that is directed to Kelvin. Kelvin, you are still with us. I think we can't see you, but that's okay as long as you can hear us. You mentioned that the government should further expand infrastructure spending to stimulate the economy. How much do you think is sufficient? I guess that's a very specific question. But separately, what I thought is interesting is that I suppose we have the EIS and the BSH post-COVID. Does everybody here see a need for similar large-scale safety net for businesses, a kind of insurance scheme? I think Smita just now mentioned about access to business insurance to enhance the resilience of businesses. Perhaps we can all expand a little bit on that.
Okay, so should I go?
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep, very well.
Okay, so I'll just answer the one on infrastructure spending, how much is adequate, and then there's a follow-up question right below that mentioned about post-MCO income transfers. What are the mechanisms and targets? So I'll just quickly address these questions. I think they're from the same asker. Well, I'm saying the infrastructure spending of 4 billion right now, it's low because it is the only post-MCO measure in the stimulus package right now. So I think total post-MCO spending will have to be at least double that, maybe 6 to 8% of GDP. On infrastructure spending, there is definitely no shortage of infrastructure spending, infrastructure projects to spend on. There's a huge backlog of infrastructure projects, especially in underdeveloped areas. like some parts of the East Coast that would benefit from increased retention. You know, household survey data shows that many households on the East Coast still don't have basic infrastructure and amenities like housing and etc. So that would definitely benefit from increased retention, and there are reasons to believe that overall fiscal multipliers will be quite high. And I think that the second question on mechanisms on post-MCO income transfers. I think that the mechanisms can be either through an immediate, fully refundable tax rebate, or just through the LHDN's DPN DSH mechanism. Targeting, I think best left to policymakers, but I'm thinking that we need something that's near universal, not so targeted towards the low income, but just quite broadly in general to get cash out into the real economy quickly. That's it.
Smita, would you like to expand on that, and Dr. Michael?
I think it's okay. Yeah.
Dr. Michael, are you going or?
Yeah. Yes, Smita, anything?
Okay, so no, I think as Calvin pointed out that the post-COVID measures, I think more can be done, and there will be, given the severity of the crisis now, there will be a lot more required to build up the resilience of SMEs especially. So you need to do a lot more to boost demand, and that will primarily have to come from the government at this point. You know, build a lot more into kind of policies to make sure that there is enough for the private sector to be able to target new markets or even regain the lost markets. And I cannot emphasize enough the need for reskilling as well as you know, digitizing and getting more online presence, because that is going to be the new normal going forward.
That makes sense, because I think if we are looking at this from a long-term perspective, we are looking at, I think the government and everybody should start thinking about a post-COVID-19 sort of approach and how you are going to deal with the aftermath, and perhaps in a way build back better, which is a term used in the wartime, during a wartime scenario, where we are talking about how do you build resilience into the whole of society. Which brings me to one interesting point that I have in mind when we talk about production at the very moment where we are trying to save, fight the fire as we speak. Is there any way that we can up our production and smooth out the supply chain to very specific areas for the frontliners when we are talking about medical supplies, when we are talking about ensuring food security? What are your views on that, and how should this be approached?
The way I look at it, you know, this, I think government should look into like medical supply or even food security, the whole ecosystem, the whole supply chain. Government should focus on building up those ecosystems. Even like today, we have our own, actually like a lot of medical equipment or medical supply, we can manufacture ourselves. But some of the, due to the business, due to the profit, then the important part they had to import, they import from overseas or rely on some other country. Like during this lockdown, a lot of country not allowed to export when they are locked down, so we are facing this difficulty. Actually, internally, we have our technology, we have our factory, we are able to do it, but we must, should build it up, the whole ecosystem and the whole supply chain, in our own country. When this lockdown, then the other country that are doing the same, not allowed to export all their raw material, then we have enough supply internally, especially food security.
If I can add, I think you bring a very valid point, and that is what I was trying to allude to when I said that the crisis has shown us that firms actually need to be a lot more agile and adaptable. Many countries, textile firms have started, manufacturing masks and PPE gear. And then there are automotive companies that have started, manufacturing ventilators in some countries. Having said that, it has not been easy. So it is challenging when you don't have the wherewithal and the technological capabilities to actually adapt your entire production supply chain to this kind of new products. But I think there are cases where, Malaysia is a large exporter and producer of medical gloves. So, what has been done in terms of making sure that, there is an adequate supply and more. Coming back to tourism, for example, there have been cases where large tourist attractions or theaters or whatever, when we have been converted into quarantine facilities to make sure that, the workers are still are able to be paid by the government in this case. So those are the kind of things to look for. Definitely, I think you have a very valid point that the crisis is also an opportunity. We should also use this as much as possible to strengthen what Malaysia can do more of and better. But it shines light to the fact that going forward, there needs to be a lot of emphasis given to upgrading, especially SMEs, so that they can be a lot more resilient going forward.
Thank you very much for your view. I think we're running a little bit out of time. What would be good is that I think there's about two more questions that we have. Perhaps we can sort of answer them, and if it's possible to give a wrap up from every speaker on the very latest news that there's going to be another 2 weeks and of the MCO, and how perhaps for Dr. Michael, the implications for the SMEs and how we can ensure that they sustain themselves. And for Smita and Kelvin as well, an overall view. Now, the two questions is, one of it is whether is it possible to do a relief from rental obligations under the law? So perhaps a temporary bill to deal with the coronavirus. A lot of the few countries that I understand that has been doing that. Singapore has been doing that, for example. And the other one is, with the oil price crash and the falling revenues, should Malaysia reintroduce GST in the long term? I think throughout the questions there were a lot of concerns on how Malaysia is going to be able to sustain or get revenue due to the oil crisis. So that could be another point. So perhaps should we start? Should we start with Kelvin?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just take the question on GST and financing. So I think that firstly, even if we don't have, even if it's not called GST, we'll definitely need some sort of value-added consumption tax. You can call it GST2 or whatever, but I think there's definitely a need for that in view of foreign revenues. But that alone, even that alone is not enough. We need definitely more than that. We need full taxation reform, right? Not only on consumption taxes, but on all taxes, right? Including looking at moving towards more progressive taxation on wealth and capital. I think that will be one of the things to consider for the future. Besides that, increasing the tax base, getting more people into the income tax net. I think that will be key.
Thank you, Kelvin. Smita, anything you would like to add on?
I think exploring options of increasing revenues in terms of from GLCs, as well as the sale of physical assets, could be one option in terms of non-tax revenue base. And are we also answering the question of what next, or is it just this?
Sure.
I think given that now we know that the MCO is extended for another 2 weeks, people like Dato' Kang and the efforts that DOSM has, it is really important to make sure that we have real-time data that the government can work with. to be able to make sure that the government actually knows exactly, can feel the pulse of SMEs and see that what is it economically, what does it mean for SMEs, so that there is a very clear post-COVID, post-MCO strategy that the government comes up with, because there needs to be a very clear sense of which sectors will be opening up. Will it be certain regions? Will it be certain geographical regions or sectors? So I think as much information, as much real-time information that the government can work with, I think that is the key to making sure that we have a very robust game plan going forward.
Dr. Michael, anything you would like to add on as well before we wrap up the webinar? I think Dr. Michael looks like he's on another call.
I think he forgot to unmute.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Michael, I think
okay.
you're
okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Okay, sorry, because I forgot to on my mic. It's not another call. Okay, sorry. I think the most important, I think, like what Smida say, the government need to act fast. We should not wait. Especially when they come out this similar package. They're like very bit conservative. It's not aggressive enough. You can see we extended 2 more weeks. What happened if after 2 weeks we can extend another 2 weeks? I think the way I see it, will more and more SME will close down. The more and more people will lose a job. I think government have to take a very quick decision now, and that's why when I propose to government the additional similar package must be bold and aggressive enough. That's why when we propose, in my proposal, I asked for 30 billion budget straight away to help SME to release to SME, so that the SME can plan for it, to make decision to go forward. And if straight plan until it, just in case the MCO extended until end of May, then they have a better preparation when come the post-COVID. I think this is the we are looking at. You can't now currently we just only propose for 3 months of subsidy, wages subsidy, like micro only 3,000. If just in case it will be the government will announce another round of subsidy, then for SME to plan is considered as something like what we say, wait and see what the government are moving forward. So they can't see the future or the bright future, how to plan forward. I think that's why I'm looking at how we can work hand on hand, that together with the government and private sector, we work together, overcome this issue. Okay, straight, we plan upfront, and just if we can propose this COVID, we can end by end of April. I think everybody will gain the momentum and build up the economy. This is more important. If you can't do it, step by 2 weeks and 2 weeks and 2 weeks, like even in Singapore, when they announce it, one shot is 1 month, then people know what to do and how to plan for it. Because like today, a lot of people hope that 2 weeks, 14th of April, they can start operate. So now another 2 weeks, then they say, every one of them start thinking how to do that. When the first MCO announced, a lot of SME told me they took only 2 weeks. They did not go, even they're under essential services, they did not go and apply for operation. Then 2 weeks later, after they announced, they say, I need to apply for extension for operation, partially operation, but the MITI was closed, the accepting the application. All these are a problem which is SME will face a lot of uncertainty. Yeah.
That makes very much sense. Let's hope that this situation will pan out until end of April, and hopefully there will be enough data and information to make sure that the next step would not be sort of similar. Once again, I want to thank all the speakers here to spend your Friday afternoon with us for our first REFSA Discuss, which is an online webinar session. For this topic, I hope that you gain some insights into the areas that we're discussing about. And if you want to review it back, like I say, we will have it recorded and put on our website. Thank you very much as well for the attendees for participating. Have a good weekend, everyone, and stay safe. Hashtag stay at home. And let's all hope for the best, but take care of yourself and your family as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to speakers as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ihan.